Do the teachings and ministry of Jesus Christ align with the principles of the Occupy movement? We interviewed 6 Swarthmore students from different religious backgrounds to get their perspectives on the issue.
I feel like he would say he would, but then he wouldn't, in actuality. Like, that's the Jesus I was brought up with. He's a slick PR guy. He knows what's popular, but he's not going to give any money or help. He's not going to go pass out fishies to the crowds. He's not going to get in the way of the cops, for sure. The Catholic Church loves authority. He's not going to shield protesters with his own body. I mean, when I read the New Testament now, I see a guy who doesn't really ever talk about sex, doesn't really work to include women in his leadership. Like, he's got a couple, better than Paul, but he's not, there's not a real effort to build a sort of gender diverse community. He is somebody who takes anybody from all walks of life, so that's something, I guess. And he's committed to helping the poor. He also says he hears God in his head. So usually when people do that today, you run really far fast. Again, specific context, he's not some white college kid chilling in Independence Small in a tent because he can or she can afford to.
I was raised in the Methodist Church, attended until about the 7th grade, and really stopped going after I was confirmed into the church, I guess. I guess I've been sort of following Occupy since it started, I guess a few weeks before the beginning of the occupation in September, and was fairly involved in the fall, as much as I could be going to school. I went into OccupyPhilly a few times, and then over October break went into Occupy Wall Street and also went down to Occupy DC. So I wasn't really too thoroughly involved in terms of organizing and being involved in working groups, but I was in the physical space a decent amount, and read a lot of news coverage of it, a lot of blogs and theory around it. So most of my kind of knowledge about it is secondhand, and then helped to organize a few GAs on campus. I would say that Jesus would be supportive. I mean, there are schools of thought which say Jesus was the first socialist, and Jesus was the first anarchist even. There are schools of Christian anarchism that would say Jesus is pretty intimately aligned with the Occupy movement. Yeah, I think in terms of what documents we have, in terms of what Jesus said, it would be, I would, probably put him pretty closely in line with a lot of my own political analysis, I guess. I wouldn't necessarily claim that, but I would say in terms of what he said, it would align pretty closely with the principles of the Occupy movement.
Jesus said to him, "If you would be perfect, go, sell what you possess and give to the poor, and you will have treasure in heaven, and come, follow me."
From the time I was 4 years old, I went to Lutheran preschool all the way through Lutheran high school. Took religion classes in high school, went to Sunday school, went to church every week. I think Jesus would not be in favor of the Occupy movement.
Why not?
The first thing that came to my mind when I was asked this question was a quote from when Jesus was being questioned by the Pharisees, when he said, "Give to Caesar what is Caesar's," when they were asking about taxes. So I feel like that if the 1% have earned their money, then it's their money and they deserve it. And it's not for anybody to take away from them.
Jesus said to them, "Give to Caesar what is Caesar's, and to God what is God's."
So I was raised as a Quaker, and Quakerism is really about the idea that everyone has that of God in them. And it's not directly related to Jesus, but now that I'm thinking about it, a lot of Jesus' teachings are really central to Quaker ideals. So the idea that everyone's equal because everyone has God in them, and that we should live life simply, we should live life peacefully, are all pretty much what Jesus would say, right? Really big part of Quakerism is political activism and peace activism, just activism in general. If you look at George Lakey, he's a great example of that. Just the idea that you should always be looking out for everyone's best interest, and Quakers have a long history of civil disobedience. So, I mean, in that sense, I think the Quakerism that I was raised in would be totally aligned with the Occupy movement, and I'm sure there are probably Quaker groups that are, in fact, deeply involved in it.
But if anyone has the world's goods and sees his brothers in need, yet closes his heart against him, how does God's love abide in him?
Jesus was definitely a 1%er. I mean, maybe not. He was poor, but definitely in favor of just doing whatever the hell you want. The state, he didn't even answer Pilate. He was like, I'm not even going to talk to you. Silence. You have no power over me. Screw the state. Do what you're going to do. And if you get rich doing it, good for you, Right on.
He entered his headquarters again and said to Jesus, "Where are you from?" But Jesus gave him no answer. So Pilate said to him, "You will not speak to me? Do you not know that I have the authority to release you and authority to crucify you?" Jesus answered him, "You would have no authority over me at all unless it had been given to you from above. Therefore, he who delivered me over you has the greater sin."
My father was a minister, so we had a somewhat religious family. When I was younger, we'd go to church most of the time, but my dad is also pretty liberal. I think in terms of how important church was, it was more important going when we were younger, and then once we kind of got into high school and that kind of thing, we go a lot less. And nowadays my dad usually doesn't even go to church unless he's preaching. My sister has become kind of atheist, and my brother has become a minister. I feel like I'm kind of in between. So I've done some Bible study, but not too much. I'm more focused on kind of community aspects of religion. I've only been a couple times to locations in Seattle and in Philadelphia. In terms of my opinion of it, I like the conversation that it's created around resources and privilege, and I think it's also the criticisms of Occupy have also added a lot to the conversation in terms of who's participating in Occupy, what the leadership roles are, and who's taking on leadership roles, and the ways that a lot of minority groups have been marginalized even within the Occupy movement. Yeah, I think he would be totally for the Occupy movement. I think it, in terms of talking about the 99% and redistribution of wealth, and in terms of thinking about where people devote their resources and where the focus of people's attention is, I think he was about focusing away from the elites in society, and focusing on raising up the community, and kind of focusing on. I think he Jesus' message fits really well with a lot of the messages out of Occupy.
With the Swarthmore student opinion divided, we traveled to OccupyPhilly to see whether occupiers themselves believed Jesus' message was congruent with their own.
My name is Sam Adams, and I'm here with the Occupy movement. I decided when I came home from Vietnam that I wouldn't sit silently and watch stuff like that happen again. So I became part of this movement. I was raised a Catholic, and I turned away from that in junior high school, and I was involved in Protestantism for a while, evangelical Protestantism, and I dabbled a little bit in Messianic Judaism. I had a buddy who was a Messianic Jew, and he took me to some Shabbat services, and I really enjoyed the joyfulness and the dancing and just the people are coming from the heart, trying to get next to their concept of God. But there's a lot more to God than was presented to me as a child in traditional churches. I found that in Catholicism they really don't read the Bible. They quote a couple of chapters, a couple of verses out of Paul or something, and then the priest will go into a long sermon about a very small part of it. When you take the whole thing in its context, it's quite revealing. And the more you look at it, the deeper it gets. It's like peeling an onion pack. The deeper you go, the more there is to see. I became very interested in going to Bible study in the Protestant church, and they have a Bible study every Sunday. And I thought the insight that the ministry had about the stuff that was going on in the Bible that I'd never heard in Catholicism was fascinating. So I think the Catholic Church is the first major worldwide corporation. Right here. Right here. I mean, here's a guy who was poor his whole life. He never traveled more than 100 miles away from where he was born.
We are all sanitation.
We are all sanitation.
There's a lot of crap on the ground.
There's a lot of crap on the ground.
Pick up your crap.
Pick up your crap. What was the message of someone like Jesus, or someone like Buddha, or someone like Muhammad? These were all poor people. They didn't have a lot of money. They weren't world leaders. They found they became inspired to seek their own way, and the basic message was don't hurt other people. Love your neighbor as yourself. Do unto others as you do unto yourself. Feed the poor. Heal the sick. A very revolutionary figure in his time, and as we were talking before, he was killed by the state because he was such a rabble-rouser. People followed him wherever he went, and his message was, seek the kingdom of God. It's not in treasure. It's not in things that can rot and rust. It's in the spirit, and it's in the world all around you. It's in your brothers and your sisters, and the God who you worship. I don't know if he'd be. Jesus isn't really portrayed as being a rabble rouser, but his words were very rabble rousing. And here's a guy who got pissed off and drove the money changers out of the temple. My father's house is a house of worship. It turned into a den of thieves. Wow, that's profound, And to change the water into wine at a marriage ceremony because they're out of wine, like they were talking about before, the breaking of the bread to feed 5,000 people. He also said you also can do this stuff, if you have faith.
And Jesus entered the temple and drove out all who sold and bought in the temple, and he overturned the tables of the money changers and the seats of those who sold pigeons.
My name is Per Folland, and I am in the Occupy movement here in Occupy Philadelphia. I'm also an ordained minister in the Church of the Nazarene, and I am connecting with other folk, developing Christian community in the Occupy context. And I've been involved in these ways since almost the beginning. I wasn't at the initial meeting, but almost the beginning of Occupy as a location in Philadelphia. I did camp a couple of days a week down at Dilworth Plaza. I'm a dad, and I got my daughter to school late when I kept her down there, so She stayed one night, and I managed to then go back about twice a week. But I've been pretty involved since that time. Out to this is Raquel, my daughter.
Hi,
And,
it's nice to meet you.
But yeah, I see this going hand in hand. I really am believing that I am firstly, my first reason for being here is to develop the Occupy movement, and I do that out of my Christian commitment. And then as I am here supporting the Occupy movement, I am also developing and working with others to develop Christian community in this context. And I really believe that what's occurring in Occupy, while many folk would not name Jesus as source, I believe that as a Christian, when I look at what's occurring in Occupy, I'm seeing something that's sourced in Jesus. So that doesn't mean that I'm making sense of everyone else's experience or naming theirs, mine, sort of secretly, but rather I am believing that the Jesus whom I worship is instigating this work. And because I'm believing that, I'm thinking that for the church to be effective in the community and amidst this generation, the church ought to be kind of riding this wave of Occupy, not in the sense of using it, but in the sense of participating in it and learning to kind of flow in its directions. And I'm also believing that the church ought, therefore, to be really supporting this movement because I believe it's something instigated by Jesus. I like to say that this movement is about earth care and political democratization, economic justice, and the end of social privilege. I believe it was Jesus standing for these things, while maybe environmentalism wasn't, a key issue 2,000 years ago in people's conscience, that his standing for the values that are behind these things are a big reason why he was followed. I mean, they're a big reason why people said, there's a good man, he's worth trusting, I want to be like him, I support his program. And so for the church to not get involved in a movement that is of these values is really kind of, to me, it's sort of being anti-church. It's sort of not being true to its essence, its founding, its reason for being. And I think we find ourselves faced with the convenient and the practical and the self-beneficial choice of siding with oppression and its conveniences, or taking a braver, bolder stance and siding with Jesus as he revealed himself.
I go by Greg, or sometimes just G. Shit is fucked up and bullshit. That is the most profound statement I can make about any of this. Because it's a two-part question. It's first a statement, shit is fucked up. And whatever you might respond to that, whatever you might say, the answer is bullshit. He was the prototype for it. Let's just hope we don't get crucified. In a way, Jesus was teaching to be less religious. Moses was teaching to be less religious. Moses brings people out of a land of complicated religious rules and hierarchy and laws and regulations and says, all we need are 10 things, 10 basic principles. Jesus turns around and says, we don't even need 10 things, just 2. And we turn around and say, you only need 1, just a life.
Anyone who does not love does not know God, because God is love.
The members of OccupyPhilly that we interviewed on and off camera unanimously agreed that Jesus' teachings were congruent with their message.
However, the intersection between Occupy and religion is a topic that requires further exploration. In the interim, just remember, all you need is love.